Welcome to the Prof Talk Pod, brought to you by the Engaged Professor. Every 2 weeks, join us as we talk about tips and tricks to help you connect with your students, engage with industry, and stay up to date on all the teaching trends. We'll give you actionable strategies that will help improve your teaching today. Thank you for being here. Let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome to Prof Talk Pod. I'm Becky Aiken, and I'm here with for at least a few months, mostly co-host, Katie. Katie is a professor mostly in accounting and tax accounting. Is that right,
That is
Katie? At
right.
Indiana University. So I'm actually really excited to talk today and kind of extend our last episode on syllabi with Katie, and a topic that she brought up in one of our conversations a few months back when we were talking about the podcast. And that is understanding what inclusive syllabi are, what they mean, how do you make your syllabi inclusive, why does it matter? So I think we're going to do a little bit more of a Q&A with Katie, different than what we tend to do in other episodes. So I'm going to actually ask Katie to tell us a little bit about what does it even mean to have a syllabus that's inclusive?
Yeah, so thanks again for having me. I'm so excited to be, I think what's now kind of a regular co-host on here. It's so fun to be able to talk about what we're doing in class, a good break in the middle of the semester. So I started thinking about the Inclusive Syllabi Initiative several years ago when I was redesigning a course that I teach very consistently, and was trying to kind of think about a way that it would be equitable and feel good for everybody who was teaching it, regardless of their interest. So my interest in this topic sparked not from an interest in inclusive design or DEI, but rather from how do we get people to buy into something that they really sort of hate, which is, we have accounting majors, 70 to 80% of them want to go into audit. I teach tax. How can we get, even if you're not going into it, how can I get you to care? And so then we thought, okay, now how can we make this more of a baseline thing without. So I'll back up for a second. We did an episode earlier where we talked about TILT, the sort of inclusive design for assessments and documents, right? And the inclusive syllabi conversation is very similar to that, in that how can I put a document out into the world that everybody has equal access to without having to ask questions or feel singled out. And so that's how I view inclusive syllabi, is just finding ways to create policies in particular that make everybody feel like they have a level playing field without needing to ask for special permission for things. That's not to say that we won't have accommodations, right? But making the barrier to receiving those accommodations a lot lower.
What are some of the policies that you've seen that you've needed to maybe shift the language around or make sure you include to avoid making people feel singled out?
Yeah, one of them, and this is a controversial one, I will just be totally upfront about that, has to do with technology. And so the American Disabilities Act says that you can't have a policy in place in a classroom that that openly demonstrates that somebody has a disability. So if we have um, dis- disability related policies, or if we have classroom policies in place that say you're not allowed to use your laptop, for example, or no technology, and then we have students who have accommodations in class where they are allowed to use their laptops or allowed to record, suddenly we've automatically said to the entire group, those people have accommodations in some capacity because they are the only ones allowed to do this. And so one of the things that I have opened up on is, at least during the discussion parts of our conversation, I have an open access technology policy. Use technology however you want. There are, of course, limitations, like um, just keep in mind, the further toward the front you sit, the more people can watch what you're doing. A lot of people can see your screen. And if you disrupt somebody else's learning, you can get that technology revoked. So if you're watching an explosive action movie in the middle of my conversation about business entities in class, if it's only impacting your learning, who cares? But if your neighbor starts watching the movie, your technology goes away for the whole semester. And I enforce it. I kick people's technology out of the room, right? That way, we're not putting all the people who need a laptop in the back of the room, because that could create other issues. What if that person also has a hearing related disability, needs to sit closer to the front, or there are other pieces. So we kind of talked about this in the first episode about syllabi, but how much do I super care about this? How much am I going to enforce it? And then sort of thinking about letting it go, um, kind of here and there, as to make the classroom feel a little bit more equitable in that sense. So that's one example I'll start with.
Yeah, I think technology is a really good example because it is something that students can readily see if there's only a couple people who are allowed to do a certain thing. And then do you start even somebody raising their hand in the middle of class saying, well, why does so and so get it?
Yeah,
You're not going to be able to tell
absolutely.
them why so and so, and you don't want to tell them why so and so gets it because that's so and so's business to share with whoever they choose to share with. And one of the things that we're really seeing is opportunities to open up access to all people with lots of different ways that they need technology to help them learn. That's a great thing about technology, right? Is it has
Yes.
allowed people to be able to consume our courses in ways that maybe they couldn't have before. So I like that idea of just looking at the policies you have now and are there certain people that would be limited in their ability to
Yes.
participate in your class based on that specific policy? When
Absolutely.
when you think about like how would I even start looking at my syllabus and my policies and the way I set up my class to be thinking about things that might not be very inclusive?
So, one of the ways to think about it is to read it back to yourself. So, one of my colleagues, Bridget Stormberg, who's the associate dean of undergrad here now at Kelly, and I used to give these workshops. And one of the things we would say, and people would sort of like feel a little jarred when we would say this, but it worked, is add the phrase "because I said so" after whatever you're saying. So read your policy out loud and then say, "Because I said so." And then how does that sort of reflect on how that makes you feel? And so what we thought about from that perspective is literally just kind of going through and maybe redlining. I was gonna say redlining might not be a good word. Actually, yeah. Redlining your syllabus just to say what language in your syllabus right now is punitive versus helpful, right? And so thinking about that, like from the context of, am I just doing this to be authoritative, or am I doing this because I actually believe that this um, policy is a useful illustration of learning outcomes, it furthers learning in my class, right?
Well, and
So
that's
that,
something.
yeah,
Sorry,
that's
go
kind
ahead.
of where we started.
Well, I think that's a good thing to think about. One of the things that where I see the inclusive part coming up a lot is like inexcused absences. We're trying to evaluate whose excused
Yes,
absence
exactly.
is more relevant or important
Yep.
than others. And I feel like that's one policy everybody could look at and determine. It's easy for me to say that you should be primarily in the classroom and school is the only thing you should be doing. But some lives, that's not their reality. That's not
Yes.
possible. They're taking care of a sick parent at home or a sibling and trying to determine whose excuse is more valid than another's. It's a good opportunity to step back and say, if you do list excused absences and what's excused, try to think a little bit bigger about some of the barriers that students might be facing that you did not in fact face because that's the challenge, right? Is like thinking
Yes, exactly.
if I take myself out of this, what other challenges that I didn't experience might students have and how do I need to make sure my policy doesn't make them feel like they are bad for that being their experience.
Yeah, so we're thinking about this in the context of building community and not punishing students, right? I do want to point out before I get too far into the how piece here that is quite a bit of research out there that supports that social belonging impacts students from marginalized groups. Like, so building a community in your classroom um, impacts enrollment of historically marginalized groups, women, students, um, from all types of marginalized groups. And that social belonging is a really important component of retention, of keeping them there. So you are benefited by creating a community in your classroom. And by the way, I want to mention I'm not a warm and fuzzy a human really necessarily. I don't have like tons and tons of super warm language in my syllabus. It's just the the context, right? Um, use language we, I, you instead of the students, the instructor of the course. Really like own it. You're writing it. You should own the language that you're using. And I think that that's a really good starting point. Definitely to your point about the punishing your students. Our students are adult human beings who deserve our respect. They just are. We can complain about them. We can talk about things that are working and that aren't working. They're humans who deserve our respect. They're looking to us and to the language that we're using as models for successful practices, whether that's in business or lifestyle or in general. And they want an active role in how their experiences are being guided. And so making our syllabus just from the get-go feel like community based rather than this is a list of rules and here's how I will punish you sets that tone. One thing I point out to, I do a lot of presentations to this end or used to before Indiana cut all of its DEIB funding in the entire state. One of the things we point out is that your students are going to read your syllabi before they meet you, and they're going to have an opinion of you. You know this. You've read a document about somebody. You've learned about somebody, something about somebody before you've actually met them in person. They're forming an opinion about you before they meet you. And if your syllabus is super punitive in language, it's going to be, I think, difficult to get buy-in from your students, even if you as a human are not like that.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing. I love the idea of using the terms "we," and we
Yeah.
mentioned this in last episode, like, I don't write to students will. Students are you.
Yep.
You will do this, and I will do that, and we together will build this, and we agree that this classroom environment should be a place where everybody feels heard and respected, like, that kind of language is a good way to immediately make students feel like they're a part of the thing and not just another group that you're trying to get through the door,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And
Absolutely.
and I think that's such a good point of, where do you include somewhere where you talk about respect and interaction so that students know that if they do have an accommodation. If they do have a personal struggle, they don't need to tell you everything, but they know that you view them as a human who has personal struggles and needs, and you're willing to talk about them and they can come to you to get support. I think that's a really important element to make your SOBI feel like
Yes.
students are a part of and not just something you're talking to.
Absolutely. And I think to kind of add to that, I have a line and I'll be honest with you, I've broadened it, I would say. Not watered down is probably not the right term, but I have a paragraph in my syllabus that used to say inclusion and now says community that just says, "Hey, you all are welcome here, but more importantly, I'm still learning." And so if you don't feel comfortable about something that someone in my class says or does, come talk to me, come talk to somebody else, and we're going to try to remedy the situation. But students benefit a lot from hearing us say, "I'm still learning. Thank you so much for giving me that feedback." And that's whether we're talking about inclusive policies or something else, right? They want us to say, you're so right. Now I know. And let's talk about how we can make that different.
Well, because we also come from a specific lived experience and don't necessarily know what it's like to take our courses
Yep.
with different challenges. I have some students right now who were telling me what their experience is during Ramadan, which I had
Uh-huh.
no knowledge of, no understanding, no clear view of what that means. And they're willing to come tell me about it. Hopefully, partially because I built an environment where they don't feel scared that I will say, well, you can't miss that. You got to figure it out. Too bad for you, hopefully, right? And I think there's intentional ways that we can do that from the start in the syllabus so that, like you said, when they walk into our classroom, they view us as somebody who is inclusive versus somebody who is, this is the way
Yes,
things work, and you either like it or you get out.
absolutely. And I mean, we make accommodations for athletes. We make accommodations for people who have religious holiday exemptions. And I think a lot of times we're thinking about, not every time, but a lot of times we're thinking about the accommodations piece as just a box to check, right? And not thinking about, okay, how can you fit into the broader community of our class? Absolutely. One of my favorite things, and this is actually like kind of inspiring to me to think about my class as a whole, is my daughters go to a pretty diverse school district. It's a huge school district. And I remember in our elementary school in particular is pretty big. And I remember a couple of years ago, I think the principal sent out a message to the effect of, here's how to talk to your kids about Ramadan. And one of it was like, some of their classmates are going to be grouchy because they can't eat during the day, or like, here's how to be respectful. Here's how to like celebrate Ramadan with them. And I thought that was super cool. It was like, my oldest daughter got home and I was like, "Hey, is this person feeling a little grouchy today?" She's like, "Yeah, he's celebrating Ramadan, and so he's telling me about when he can eat." I was like, "That's pretty cool." Like, not, "Oh, be careful. Some students are celebrating Ramadan right now," but here's how to have conversations about like supporting your friends who are physically experience this, and what sort of celebration it is, and how you can say happy Ramadan in the appropriate ways, right? Or not make that person feel marginalized because they didn't get a meal yet today.
Yeah, I think that's such a good example of, making it bigger, right? Thinking bigger picture
Yes.
about interactions and how you work with students beyond just what you write in the syllabus, like actually living the things out to make people feel like they are included in what you're doing.
Yes, absolutely. And making it a normal thing, right? Across the pedagogical sphere, not making it feel like a one-off.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to make. So do you have an idea, like if you're a faculty member who's says, "Great, I could look at my list of policies, but I don't really know. I haven't really thought about it before." Are there resources, places they can go, things that they can look at or read, or policy
Yeah.
examples that they might be able to think about including?
I got a lot of my information from my university's Center for Teaching and Learning. They do a lot of, and I think they do these things of like micro, right? So they don't think about these like as policies. They'll talk about like technology. The four categories I think about, by the way, are technology, attendance, late work, professionalism. One of the, yeah, so I start with my Center for Teaching and Learning. One other example of this, by the way, I was just thinking about is I had a, I was doing this presentation for a group and somebody raised their hand. And I actually do this now. I was inspired by like somebody in the audience, and he was like, it was about late work. And he goes, if something's due at 11:59 p.m., I'm not grading it at midnight. I'll probably sleep when it's due, right? He goes, I just keep it open until 8 a.m. the next day. Or he said, he goes, I give them, and it's due at this time, but on Canvas you can do the until. He goes, I give him 6 or 8 hours because, like, let's be realistic. It's due at that time because that's a clean number. I'm not going to look at it. And so if they turn it in at 4 in the morning, truly, how is that impacting me? If it's 4 hours late. And he goes, they don't have to email me and tell me that it was late. They just submit it. And it shows up that it was after 11:59 p.m., but they don't ask questions. And I don't ask questions, and we just sort of roll with it. And I was like, you know what? That's like a really good thought. The late work policy of, I don't tell them that, by the way. It just stays open until I think mine is 6 a.m. or 8 a.m. If you're a night owl and you just miscalculated how long it's going to take you, okay, what harm is that really doing me? And I think that's it. We can talk about resources. We can talk about, proper policy creation and all this, but really, and I'm going to use the term that my kids use and that my students use, it's vibes. It is vibes. How do you feel? Like, what's realistic? Are you really going to care if one of your students has their phone out in class? Like, if you do care, put that in your syllabus. But do you care?
Yeah, I think late work is an interesting area. So technology, we talked a little bit about
Yeah.
late work and how that is in how you can make that policy inclusive. But that's interesting to think about, like your approach to how can you think about students who maybe do have a different work schedule or
Yeah.
a different, just like I am best in the
Clock.
morning,
Different clock.
right?
I'm best in the
Exactly.
morning also. Me too.
I'm best in the morning, but I will work until midnight or 1 on simple tasks,
Yep.
and I know people who they would prefer to work until 2 AM, like, that is how their brain is
Yep.
wired, and that's probably fine,
It
honestly, like,
is.
It is, and thinking
It
about we have due dates on 11:59 at a night because it is nice and round, and it's challenging to say, like, "It's due on March 3rd until midnight or March 4th until 6 a.m." Like, that is probably gonna cause more confusion. But thinking about, what does the late work matter, right? Is it
right.
important? I don't have late work policies in most of my classes until students get later on in their academic journey. And part of that is because I do think it takes a while to learn how to manage your time in college. And I don't want a freshman to fail my class because
Yes,
they didn't understand what it
exactly,
means to be a college student. I
exactly,
don't think that
exactly.
serves them. And so I don't have late policies in most of my freshman level courses. And part of that is also it helps a lot with students who do have a different even like semester schedule. Like if I'm
Yes,
a student athlete and I am in basketball season, March is a bad month. It is a bad month always. But and yes, of course I should just do it early. But let's ask ourselves, just take a second to internally reflect. When was the last time that you had a work task that you did a month prior to it was needing to be done?
right, right, exactly.
Probably very rarely, if
Yes,
ever,
exactly.
right?
Yeah,
Unless you're in like this way top 1% of people who are super ahead of the
just need to
curve.
get it done or I know I'm gonna be busy or and you're self-aware. I will give you, the other side to this example, which is I did have a student, last semester, I believe, and I had this student in both in, like, 2 classes, and so I knew the patterns, and this student would treat the 6 a.m. until as the deadline and would start sending me work at 10 a.m. Or I would get an email, "You forgot to put until 6 a.m." But that's and so I think I could say, like, this is not going easy on your students. This is students follow it or, like, Canvas blows up. I don't wanna get 100 emails. If Canvas crashes at 12:01 or 11:57, the assignment's staying open. If you wanna shoot me
It's
an
gonna
email,
be
tell me
fine.
Canvas crashed. Great. But I don't wanna know. Like, I don't need 100 emails. But if you're abusing it, those students are going to make themselves known. Does that make sense? Like, they're gonna come out of the woodwork and be like, you're gonna be able to tell which ones are abusing it. And then I was able to have a little leeway with that student and be like, this is truly late. And there's a pattern here, a little bit of discretion in that area. But your students are not, for the most part, trying to trick you or be malicious, and they're not lazy. They're adult humans who have a lot going on, like a lot. I'm going to open an assignment early this upcoming week because it's about to be spring break, and they're all telling me we're leaving and we have 4 exams. I'm like, if you want to get mine done early, what harm is that going to do to me? And so I think it's important to kind of have that lens of how is this impacting my life? Is it I want them to learn about what the real world is like? There's grace in all of that, though. And if it truly is, there have been a couple situations where I'm like, guys, I have to have it done at this time because it's contingent on the next step. A peer review is coming. I need to grade before finals, whatever it may be. That's going to be an exception. And we're articulating that clearly rather than just like, oh, I decided that I have to be super hard in my policies.
When I think the key is going back to your syllabus and thinking in this policy, is there room for
Yes,
students who may need that room due to life circumstances and, a
absolutely.
disability or different, like, personality trait or neurodivergent need, like, there's
Yes.
all kinds of different needs, and are you
Yes.
at least thinking about how that policy might need to fit within those?
And are we not rewarding students for being loud, right? Are we not only rewarding the students who speak up? So somebody might have something going on, and they're just not telling us about it. That does not mean that that person should have a disadvantage. So one of the things, and I know we're almost out of time here, that I started doing in my syllabus is putting a parameters around my statute of limitation for discussing assignment grades. Once the grade's posted, you have 2 weeks to talk to me. And beyond that, I won't discuss that particular grade. And it's because the loud students, the ambitious students, the grifters and the grovelers will ask me at the very end of this semester to go review something from week 3. That's not fair to the people who also had something going on during week 3 who just didn't tell me about it, right? And so um it's a part of inclusivity is putting gates, putting up fences, right? Parameters so that you're not only rewarding people who are loud.
And if you do make a decision that that does come from somebody making noise, right? Then you need to communicate how other students can take
Yes,
advantage of the
absolutely.
same
Yeah,
decision. So that's something I always tell my students, like, I don't build extra credit into my classes, but like every professor, I get a lot of requests toward the end of the semester
yes,
for extra credit. What
yeah,
can I do to increase my grade? And you always have to step back as you're thinking about inclusivity in the classroom and say, if I let this student do it, how do I make sure everybody else has the
yes,
opportunity? Can I give
absolutely,
it something where everybody else can make up the assignment in the same way? And
absolutely.
is it clear, right? I can't just tell that student and say, "Well, everybody could ask
And am
for it,
I
and if they didn't
offering
ask for it,
yes,
it's their" yeah, but you have to actively offer it out,
to
and
everybody,
that's a
"Hey, I
good thing
just"
to remember.
Yep, absolutely agree.
Well, I think one of the good things to remember is if you're interested in even thinking a little bit more about making your syllabi more inclusive or thinking about how you can approach your class from a more inclusive mindset of remembering that some people will, not say anything, but have the same challenges or needs. It's a good opportunity to go to your university's center for teaching, whatever at KU, it's a center for teaching excellence. You also can find most centers for teaching excellence at large universities like
Yes,
IU and
mine
KU. You can find stuff on their website if you're from a smaller university that doesn't have quite the same resources there that give you some suggestions on what are the areas you should be thinking about, how can you build that into your ways you approach your course and directly into your policies. And also, like Katie said, I think one of the more important things is being open to learning from your students as you go, the things that might not be as inclusive as you thought they were, and listening and really thinking
mhm.
about how can I shift the ways that I do things based on the students who are bringing things up to me that I didn't necessarily see before. Cool. Katie, anything else you want to add?
This is not about DEI, DEIB, diversity or anything. It's just about it's equity. It's about leveling the playing field for everybody without you having to get a whole bunch of emails and questions about it. And that's what I would say. I didn't set out to do inclusive stuff because I was passionate about DEIB or DEIJ, whatever it may be. I set it out to, frankly, to make my life easier. And I think that you'll find if you incorporate some of these, make it feel more community based, think about those policies that do you really have to enforce that? Your job is going to get a lot easier. Paperwork decreases significantly.
Yeah, and again, it opens up opportunities for students. And remember that students talk to each other.
Yes.
So, when people are looking at taking your class and whether you have been a quote unquote good professor, which is a loaded term, but one of the things that they will remember is the feeling of belonging and inclusion they had from the environment that you set out.
Yes.
And for me, if I'm getting students who say those things about my classroom environment, that's a win. Obviously, I want them to learn the things too, but I want them to learn it in a way that makes them feel like they belong and like they're having a positive experience. So, keep
Absolutely.
that in mind as well. And if you don't know if your policies are inclusive, you could just ask your students.
Yes,
It's definitely
absolutely.
an
Ask for
option.
feedback. Leave them
Ask
in
how
touch
they
with feedback.
feel. That's right. Okay. Well, thank you all for joining us this week again. We appreciate your comments or your feedback. Any suggestions you have or ideas you have for making syllabi or courses more inclusive, feel free to comment those or send me an email, Becky at theengagedprofessor.com. I'd love to hear more about what you're doing in your classes and ways that we can help you approach your syllabi creation and your classroom environment. And until next time, I hope you keep enjoying the work that you do. Thank you.